Everyone, this is Katie from Katie Loves Classic Books, and I'm here today with some Steinbeck reviews. So if you watched my November wrap-up, you'll know that I read most of the short novels in this collection of Steinbeck's short novels. And I wanted to have a separate video to review them because I knew it would take a while. So this is a Steinbeck-centered review video. And I will be reviewing everything in here except Of Mice and Men. I'll put a link to a written review I have of it down below because I read it last year, so I didn't need to read it again so soon. Anyway, so the first book that I read in this collection that I'll talk to you about was Tortilla Flat, and that was published in 1935, and I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars, so sadly, I did not love that one. It was my least favorite in the collection, I hate to say. So, Tortilla Flat follows a group of Paisanos, which are, I believe, they're like Native Californians with like Native American, Mexican, and Spanish descent, I believe. So this group of Paisanos, and they're living in an area of Monterey, California. And it's a little bit after World War I believe. And we follow this man named Danny mostly. He's kind of the center of the group, and his friends, and the house they all live in. And this is largely based on the legends of King Arthur, kind of. With like Danny as King Arthur and like his friends as the Knights of the Round Table, I guess. But instead, they're very much like, purposeless guys, and they kind of spend their days jobless and drinking a lot of wine and going on adventures, but they do have some good intentions. So this short novel didn't really have a plot. It was mostly a bunch of anecdotes. And at first, I did not get the point of it. I think I appreciated the fact that he kind of based this on King Arthur, because I read L'Amour d'Arthur a few months ago, so I appreciated that kind of reference. But at first, I just could not see where the story was going. I just saw a bunch of purposeless guys that drank too much, and I was like, ugh, how much longer is this going to go on? Then I kind of appreciated it more as it went on, especially when I saw like their good intentions and kind of their sense of brotherhood, and kind of understanding that he was painting a portrait of kind of outsiders in society in a period of time when jobs and money were hard to come by. And Steinbeck always takes the side of the underdog, and that's something really cool about him. He wanted to write about the people on the margins of society, the outsiders, the people that normally wouldn't have a voice, perhaps. So in that respect, Tortilla Flat was interesting. But yeah, not my favorite. It was really hard to get into that short novel, to be honest. And there were some problematic things too. Like there are problematic things in other of Steinbeck's works, and in a lot of other classics too. Like I read a lot of classics. There's a lot of problematic things that in today's world we're not so cool with, but sometimes it stands out a lot more and kind of slaps you in the face, and that happened in Tortilla Flat. Like his portrayal of women was like really not good at all, and there were a few racial slurs that were very like stand out. And so yeah, Tortilla Flat, not my favorite. Hard to like, saw some merit in it, but yeah, I don't particularly recommend that one if you're interested in getting into Steinbeck. The second short novel that I read in this bind-up was The Red Pony, which was published in 1937. And I liked that a lot more than Tortilla Flat. So that short novel or novella follows a boy named Jody growing up on a ranch near Salinas, California. And when he is gifted a red pony, his experiences with that red pony awaken him to the facts of life. And the red pony isn't in the entire story. His experience with that pony just sort of starts this growing process he goes through. So it starts with the red pony, and then all these other experiences he has on the ranch, and mostly with horses, awaken him to the facts of life and the cycles of life, such as death and birth and sex and old age. And it was very brutal, but yet I really liked how his awakening to the cycles of life was portrayed. So I appreciated that, but did find it brutal. Yeah, and I didn't know what to expect going into this. I just kind of expected a sad animal story with a title like The Red Pony. And was like, this is just gonna be a sad animal story, isn't it? And it was sad, but there was a lot more depth to it, and it was about so much more than I thought. And besides the cycles of life, it's also an interesting portrayal of masculinity, because this is kind of about Jody growing up, kind of a coming of age of sorts, and he has these different male figures as examples. It's interesting because as he becomes a man, he's going to have to choose, the kind of man he's going to be and the traits he would like to have. And there's a lot of, especially his father, a lot of not so great masculinity surrounding him. That's kind of harsh. So it's kind of interesting. So it's definitely a coming of age type story. Awakening to the cycles of life and that sort of thing. And I found it really interesting, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, if I didn't mention that already. The third short novel I read in this collection was The Moon is Down, which was published in 1942. And I also gave that 4 out of 5 stars. So, that short novel is set during World War II. And there is a town that gets occupied and conquered by its enemy. And so we see what happens. In that town, we kind of get a view of the people in that town and the soldiers who occupy it. The biggest message was how you can't suppress free people, and this definitely was a piece of propaganda that was trying to give strength to those that lived in occupied places, and to just show the power of people when their freedom is taken away and their desire to have that freedom back. And also just this book didn't completely take sides. It also showed the soldiers and how completely unfit for war they are. There's one chapter in the book where you get an inside view with the soldiers, and they all seem a little bit ridiculous, and they don't really understand what war's about, and they just really miss their homes and families. They miss women in their lives, and they kind of want to go home as badly as the people in the town want to be free. And yeah, you just are shown human beings who happen to be enemies, who find themselves in a period of history and in a war that they don't really want to be in. And I found it a very interesting book. And I'm not usually one for war fiction, to be completely honest. But I actually quite liked The Moon is Down, and found it to be quite interesting, and for Steinbeck to show this kind of situation without taking sides, really, in a very human way, and just showing, what war does. And not so much on the grandiose scale of war, more like the smaller details of war. and what that does to people, and that it's ultimately just human beings fighting human beings, and like I said, that just find themselves in this position and don't really know how they ended up there because they don't really want to be there in the first place. And of course, like I said, this was definitely a big piece of propaganda to help give strength to suppressed peoples. And I really liked that one, and I do recommend that if you're interested. The fourth book I read in this collection was Cannery Row, which was published in 1945, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And I really loved that one. That was my favorite novel, short novel, in this whole collection. So, Cannery Row is set in Monterey, California, basically on this one street, and follows this lovable group of characters that are all pretty low on the economic ladder, but they all have good hearts and a wonderful sense of friendship, and seem to find the happiness in life for the most part. And this book also didn't have much of a plot, but that really didn't matter. This was more like a portrait of a certain place and time, and what Steinbeck created was so vivid and so heartwarming, and it's like I didn't want the story to end, not because of like a plot I wanted to keep going, just because I wanted to spend more time in this portrait that he's created with these lovable characters, you know. I want to read something he wrote in the beginning of it when he was talking about how he wanted to write this book, because like I said, this is such a portrait of a time and space, and just kind of how he wanted to let the story seep in. So let me read that section. How can the poem and the stink and the grating noise, the quality of light, the tone, the habit, and the dream be set down alive? When you collect marine animals, there are certain flatworms so delicate that they are almost impossible to capture whole, for they break and tatter under the touch. You must let them ooze and crawl of their own will onto a knife blade, and then lift them gently into your bottle of seawater. And perhaps that might be the way to write this book, to open the page and to let the stories crawl in by themselves. I just love that intro in general. Anyway, so I love the characters. They're so lovable. I love the setting. It was so vivid. It was if like I knew where everything was. Like I could walk down that street and I could find my way around. Even in one character's house, Doc, a marine biologist, his house is described so well. I feel like I could find my way around there as well. And other than that, there was a lot of humor in this book, but with some dark undertones. Again, Steinbeck is showing us people on the outside of society, but we're seeing that they can find happiness without money, you know, and all of that, which is an important message. And yet, one of the characters says a really interesting thing. He says that all the men that like display the best human qualities are the ones that aren't successful, the ones that, you know, display kindness and honesty and brotherhood, and the ones that display the worst human qualities, such as selfishness and greed, are the ones that succeed the best in society. And I thought that was a really profound moment, to be honest. Anyways, this was, Cannery Row was just a delight to read, and while it's not my favorite of Steinbeck's books still, it'll always be East of Eden. I think it is Steinbeck at his finest, and I think Henry Rowe is just a work of art, really, in its own right, and I really enjoyed it. Last book I read in this collection was The Pearl, which was published in 1947, and that was actually a reread for me. The Pearl was the first Steinbeck I ever read, but I was really young. It was for school, and I think I was like 13. I don't think I appreciated it at the time, so it was really nice rereading it because I really had had so much space from it and not enough appreciation as a kid. So The Pearl follows a native man named Kino and his family who are living in the Gulf of California, and they live in a community of brush houses, and Kino is a pearl diver. And one day when his baby is stung by a scorpion, he ends up finding this huge pearl that he thinks will solve all his family's problems. And the pearl is told in definitely a parable style format. And it's mostly a parable about greed and money and what money does to people. Again, it kind of explores outsiders, those that are, marginalized in society, and just very much about wealth and what it does to the people who obtain the wealth and the people around them. And it was very straight to the point. Like, I felt like it was a very black and white. Like, the characters are very black and white, and the story and the message is very black and white because Steinbeck was trying to get a point across. And I greatly appreciated it. A lot more so than I did when I was younger. At this age, I find it a very important little parable. And so I recommend that too. So yeah, this was really interesting in this past month reading so much Steinbeck. My favorite book of his will always be East of Eden, but I'm glad now I have read so many more. And so like I said, Cannery Row is my favorite in here, and then Tortilla Plow is my least favorite. And then the other three that I read were somewhere in between. And yeah, I think Steinbeck is wonderful. I really like him as a writer. And now that I've reading so much of his stuff back to back, he has some different styles going on that are very interesting. But yet, all of it is very Steinbeck, or to me at least. All of it seems to have his signature touch, I guess, and to touch on themes that you can tell he was passionate about. And I recommend, if you're interested in John Steinbeck, I recommend this bind up. It's pretty interesting. Penguin Classics put this out, and it's kind of cool because you get a bunch of his short novels, and I thought it was kind of fun to read all together. It's an interesting Steinbeck journey this past month. So if you're interested in Steinbeck, check out some of these, or check this book out even. So I hope you enjoyed this Steinbeck review video, and if you've read any of these books and you want to talk to me about them, or you just want to talk to me in general, recommend me something, feel free to comment below. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, which is kind of a new thing that I started, I'll put a link to that below. Any contribution is greatly appreciated. It helps me to keep getting books to read and review for you guys, and just helps me make more content and stuff like that. And other than that, I post written reviews on Tumblr and Goodreads. I also started writing for a magazine, and if you go on my Tumblr, I'll mostly have links to that there when those reviews start getting published. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out my Tumblr. And yeah, I shall see you in my next video. Bye.